This is the first image introduced in Meg's 13th chapter, the influence of modern art. This wouldn't be such an issue if not for Meg's then following this image up with this, an undated, unmarked, unnamed work from an unknown location used only to help identify how European artists found inspiration for what would be known as the Cubist movement. This is the Ivory Coast, where the masks originated from, created by the Dione people. These masks were made of a single piece of softwood and were very important to the community because they signified protection and connections to the spirit world. I suggest for this section to devote an introduction to the Dione tribe that directly influenced the specific works that Meg's has chosen to include. Meg's doesn't have very good representation throughout this chapter. I have a couple suggestions. Aaron Douglas, an African-American artist that made some illustrations for Fire, an African-American literary magazine published in New York City in 1926 during the Harlem Renaissance. Gwendolyn B. Bennett, an artist and author who also contributed to the Fire magazine, notably illustrated the cover for the Opportunity Journal of Negro Life in 1926. I would suggest and make the argument that Douglas and Bennett's work in the Fire magazine and in the Opportunity Journal should be included during the Dada period, as black artists were not represented during an art movement that in its antithesis was anti-war, anti-bourgeoisie, and anti-establishment. Black artists creating work during the Harlem Renaissance were making art in response to their current social conditions, which should be extended to the Dada movement, or a subgenre which artist Adam Pendleton named Black Dada. Meg's limits this movement to the European avant-garde. Miguel Covarrubias was a Mexican cartoonist that would illustrate different subjects from around the world, but especially in response to the Mexican Revolution. One of his interesting works was the illustration for Langston Hughes' The Weary Blues. His other work, Soldadoras en la Revolución, is also notable. In Meg's section about the Futurist movement, he highlights the work of Filippo Marinetti, whose manifesto, quote, voiced enthusiasm for war. We will fight against moralism, feminism, and all utilitarian cowardice. This would be a great place to introduce Benedetta Kappa. Her manifesto directly opposed the misogynistic views held by many of the men in this movement. For the Dada movement, Claude Cahun would be a great addition to replace one of Kurt Switter's many works. Adriana B.C. Fabri, sometimes going by the gender-neutral name of Adri, her graphic works were pivotal during this time because she was one of, if not, the only woman illustrators working during this time. Finally, Elizabeth Catlett and her print, I Am the Negro Woman, would be a great addition to this chapter because not only would she be a necessary representation of both the black community and women, but also her prints were also representative of the multicultural life she lived while in Mexico. As mentioned before, most of this chapter is Eurocentric. Here are my suggestions to create a more diverse and well-balanced list of artists from around the world. For the photography section, Gordon Parks' American Gothic. Perpetual Motion by Sachi Kono, a Japanese photographer. This portrait of a Huichol man from the 1910s by an unknown artist. Claritisi Maquette for Poster for Insect Frolic Costume Ball from New York should be included in the Surrealism movement. Mina Loy, Virgins plus Curtains minus Dots, along with Tisa's art. And Francis System Stevens' Dynamic Velocity should be included in the Futurist movement. Here are some other illustrations to be included. Natalia Goncharova's Rosa Rosa, Elena Gar's Peace, Umberto Boccioni, and Valentine di Saint-Port.